and then calculate the photosynthesis out of that model.
You mentioned also that it's important what the direction of the leaf really is to have a good measurement, right?
Yes.
In terms of the direction of your leaf surface compared to your light source. You mentioned also that these technique models that you have developed, that they can be used eventually in the future for detecting diseases, detecting problems with plants. But if you have a plant with a disease, if you have a plant with water shortage, for example, it's definitely going to change its angle. So how are you going to interact with this? I mean, those models, are they still going to be applicable as such, or do you need some adaptation to make sure that you have the right measurement with a disease in a canopy or with a water-stressed canopy?
When we are measuring the PRDF of a leaf, we are measuring all the possible angular combinations. So, as a primary input, we know what would be the reflectance of a leaf on all possible angles. So, when a leaf inside the canopy changes, then we have this measurement already. So, we can apply that knowledge to see if a leaf is tilted or not. However, what we need to know better is what is the indication of the reflectance change before the leaf loses the water. So for proactive management, we can pinpoint a certain wavelength or a certain angular position that we can see the leaf at, and then see that signal might possibly means that water stress is coming.
Oh, you even would hope to predict
but capture the water stress as early as possible. Because at the end, if the trees are losing their water, we have a total signal change, and that we can see, regardless of the position of the leaf, because we have measured all the angular possibilities.
Okay.
But the idea would be, if we can actually not predict, understand it as early as possible, detect it. Okay. So if we measure leaves with shortage, bigger shortage, or completely dry, and input these PRDF models in a model to predict water stress or diseases.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lebrov. Professor Aerts.
Dimitrios, I had 5 questions, but it has been reduced now to 3, so that's a good thing. My first question is regarding the figure you show on page 95, where you compare the model, the RBV model, with the measurements. And if you look at the figure...
The figure 5 or 6?
Figure number 5,
yep.
Where you see the left part of the figure, you see that where you have the bidirectional reflectance factor as a function of the sensor zenith angle, that especially at an angle of 60 degrees you see a deviation between the RBV model and the data. And can you explain this?
As it said previously in the book chapters, that the PRDF measurements of leaves exhibit a profound reflectance on the principal plane, which means when the zenith angle is at a higher position, the reflectance that we're receiving is much bigger than the rest of the angles. So if you can imagine that the area of higher angles provides close to the person, less close, and less close, on the 60 degrees, you have the profound peak of reflectance. That measured value, in order for the model to be able to capture it, it has to provide a model that covers all the possible scenarios. So the deviation exists in that position because of the modeling procedure. So indeed, the model is not fitting very closely for the high solar zenith angles.
My second question is also related with the model, the RBV model. You mentioned that it's a kind of a semi-empirical model. So that means that you use the data to estimate your model parameters, I assume?
Yes.
But what is not clear to me, so you have 3 parameters you have to estimate. Did you the data you show here in the figure, are these the data that you also use to estimate the parameters?
In the chapter, there are two sets of data.
Mm-hmm.
One is the 8 sets of data that were used to estimate the parameters, and these parameters are presented. And at the end of the chapter, we did the validation of our work with the 4 sets of data that were left aside. And these correlations were not as high as the parameters chosen, as you can see at the end. But yes, the first results are the result, the data used to produce the parameters, to fit the model to the data, and the second was to validate.
Thank you. And then the third question I had is on page 135, where you talk about the Lambertian versus the model BRDF canopy reflectance. And there you mention somewhere that if you increase the sampling positions from 256 square to 512 square, that you get an increase in the results of 1.5%. And the question I have is this small increase in results, is it of added value compared with the high increase, I guess, in calculation power you need?
Well, it's, the rendering time increases linearly with the number of samples. So what we did is we started early with 64, 128, and then we doubled it. So from 64 to 128 and 256, you have 5 to 10% better results. And 256 to 512, this 1.5% increase convinced us to stop there, because we did an extra trial with a double amount of rays, and it took us 4 days more to have results. So for a simulation of the number of stands that we produced and the number of sensor positions was technically, timely not possible, and we expect after the 1.5% not to be much higher the increase. So that's why we stopped there. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Aert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also have a question.